on all ends of. My name's Joy Shillingsburg, and I'm from Wake Forest, North Carolina. And I'm the founder of louder, yes, for the people hearing. Okay. I'm the founder of a program called Wake Forest Community Table. And I came to this program as through being a history teacher for 15 years. I taught U.S. history in high school outside of Philadelphia. And then I became a youth director at St. John's Episcopal Church in Wake Forest. And we started a meal program in that capacity as a youth director. But as every good historian knows, they can rarely just do one thing without thinking about the past and why you're doing that thing. And so as we continue throughout the years, giving food out in the northeast end of Wake Forest, we built relationships with the people that we were serving every night. And the history teacher in me started to get curious about my new home in Wake Forest. I've lived there for 14 years. And so that led me on this journey, which became a 501c3 last fall. And we continue to distribute food, but we also have quarterly gatherings where we center the stories of the people in the community. And we try to figure out the history and the systems that create the need for handing out food every week in this community. And so our stories are really intertwined in some really interesting ways, as so many of the presenters have been at this symposium. And I started my work, like I said, at St. John's Episcopal Church in Wake Forest. And Roxanne was an adult formation leader with me, where we started to explore Dr. Martin Luther King's call for a beloved community at our church. And so while I was doing the food program in the Northeast End as one part of my job, I was also doing classes for adults with Roxanne at St. John's. And so I'll hand that over to Roxanne.
Hi, my name is Roxanne Johnson. Can you hear me? Can you tell I was an educator? Outdoor voice time. As Joy said, I worked with her in the adult formation of Beloved Community. And that came from Dr. King's Beloved Community, in which he saw a society based on justice, equal opportunity, and love for one's fellow human being. The presiding bishop of the Anglican Church of America, the Bishop Michael Curry, it's a little nervous here. He truly espouses beloved community, and he encourages all the congregations to take part. And for the Episcopal Church, the beloved community has 4 components. It's truth-telling about our church and race. It's the proclamation proclaiming the dream of the beloved community. And it's a formation practice of practicing Jesus' way of loving the world. And it's justice in terms of repairing the breach in society and institutions created by racism. And so what we did, Joy and I, with our congregation, St. John's is a medium-sized Episcopal church in Wake Forest. The population is predominantly white, understatement. And we started out on this journey of dealing with racial reckoning and reconciliation. And I take my hat off to St. John's, my new church home, in that this was a very comfortable middle-class white Episcopal church. And they really did not have to touch on these issues, because for many of them, these issues did not directly touch on them. But there was a group that was very eager to pursue this. And we did it through reading and films, and that built over into the Wake Forest community feeding program when it was expanded to the greater Wake Forest community. And now, greater Wake Forest community. Hello. Tenice.
Thank you for the introduction. My name is Tenice Caudle. I am a native resident of the town of Wake Forest. For those who don't know, Wake Forest is actually its own town. Wake Forest University is not in the town of Wake Forest. That is in Winston-Salem. I don't know if there wants to talk about
2
that.
hours, I'll just say 2 hours west of the town of Wake Forest. They moved in 1956. They were founded in the town that we all live in.
Absolutely. So I'm a native resident, and I'm also a member of the Northeast Community Coalition. And just a little bit about our community coalition, started in 2005 by residents. This is a grassroots organization. And in 2012, we partnered with the town of Wake Forest, local churches, Habitat for Humanity, and became a part of their neighborhood revitalization program with the Habitat for Humanity. And they were able to help us really get up and going with our coalition. And we formally ended that partnership, I would say maybe in 2018. So we've been an independent organization since then. Our organization does include residents, and it also includes community partners, such as the community table program, and local churches, other organizations. And what we do with the Northeast Community Coalition, we have priorities. Some of those priorities are community events. We sponsor our town's Juneteenth celebration, family and youth events. We've had talent shows for kids, adults, fashion shows for adults, sponsorship and fundraising, and food security. Ding, 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 ding. So that's one of the common denominators with Joy's organization. And I am also a member of Olive Branch Baptist Church, where the summer feeding program under Joy's organization, that's where we had the first feeding program. So that's kind of how we all intertwine. Of course, our church also hosts the Wednesday feedings with the community table program. And so that's a little bit about me, my professional career. I choose not to talk about that because that's not what fulfills me. That's not what I'm here for. So I will pass that along.
He's in the witness protection.
It's a very boring field. It's insurance. I mean, it's boring. So no, I'm not gonna talk about that.
We're gonna be working to get this woman compensated for the good work she does that fills her heart. I'm Sarah Soleim. I am the manager of community and academic learning at the Wake Forest Historical Museum. I was hired in 2019 as when the museum began reevaluating its interpretive programs and exhibits to better represent the university's history with history and involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, slavery, Jim Crow, and racism in higher education more broadly, and then understanding and exploring the legacies of that history in our present day communities, both at the original campus in the town of Wake Forest and in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So a lot of that work has been compiled in this little booklet that is available online at the Slavery, Race, and Memory Project's website. But like the Lemon Project, the Slavery, Race, and Memory Project was founded to explore the university's history. And the museum has been a benefactor of a lot of the resources that have been invested in the Slavery, Race, and Memory Project. Resources to digitize records, to do reinterpretation, and to work with community members to better understand the connection between Olive Branch Baptist Church and the history of the school and Wake Forest Baptist Church that was founded by Wake Forest University faculty and students in 1834, and then grew and maintained an active Black congregation of both free and enslaved Black Americans, who then, after emancipation, founded Olive Branch Baptist Church, moved to the Northeast community. And so we had been working with the town of Wake Forest proper, so the historic preservation planners there, the Parks and Rec program there. And then we'd also been working kind of loosely, not officially, with the Northeast Community Coalition. We had participated in the Juneteenth celebration. We've done oral history projects with community elders in the Northeast community. But we were really looking for ways to, in anticipation of reinterpretation of the museum, how can we get community voices in that process? What does it look like to diversify our board? These are some of the questions we're grappling with right now. We have an impending executive director retirement. And so we've just been, since 2019, we've been looking at rebuilding, re-looking at the communities we serve, how we can serve them better, and how we can do this work with community organizations. Did I miss anything for the back? We're going to talk more about the museum and the research, so we'll get back to that.
I think, yeah, and I'll just before I get into this next piece, I think after sitting through kind of a day and a half of these presentations, I'm seeing something that happened with us organically. And that is somehow we of different generations, different backgrounds, we found our way together. And I think there's, my faith background tells me why that's happening, but also it speaks, I think that we have created also a model of what can be replicated across the country between university, between towns, between community organizations, between nonprofits. And that's what I'm really interested in as I've listened to a lot of these presentations over the last few days. And I'm like, wow, we just showed up here and we're replicating that as well. So I think that's really powerful. And I think you'll see that as we move through. And that was sort of our goal today, like to tell you what we've done and then maybe talk just about how we can keep doing this in other spaces or getting ideas really from you, because that's really why we're here, is to learn from all of you. So as I said, we really are more than just a meal program, right? But I think it's important for you to get a vision in your head of what Wake Forest looks like, because we're not in North Carolina or Wake Forest, and I don't know that any of you have been. So myself, my volunteer, my food advisory team, a lot of these ladies have been right on the street, and we have the Northeast end is adjacent to where the university, where the college used to be. And it's also snuggled in between a thriving town of Wake Forest. I think at one point it was one of the fastest growing towns in the country. It's a ton of transplants from the Northeast, from California. It's right outside of Raleigh. So in the Research Triangle, this is a growing town. And in this growing town, we have people who come and get over 200 meals a week on this corner. And then at Tenice's church, Olive Branch Baptist Church. And it just, again, as a historian, this isn't making sense to me. Like, I need to understand why I'm distributing this much food in the course of each week over, now what's like 7 years, right? So these are just some images of our food distribution. We've served, I think, over 25,000 meals in the past 3 years since the pandemic. And we've moved, there's my food advisory team enjoying a little bit of fellowship together at Christmas and also planning. And we all know what happens when folks come together for food, right? Something magical happens. It breaks bubbles. It joins people who maybe normally wouldn't be joined together. And that's really what Wake Forest Community Table has done and continues to do, as well as meeting a real serious need for fresh produce, for folks to be able to budget better so that they can get a few free meals during the week and then stay in an increasingly expensive area in this historically Black section quadrant of our town. We partner with community gardens, and they're just some great pictures of all the things that we're going to be doing, hopefully forever in Wake Forest community. So yeah, well, that's the food distribution part. We are way more than just food, right? So we have these quarterly community gatherings, and this is my leadership team. These are folks from both the community. Tenice isn't there, but she's here. Tenice is also on that team. Again, to go upstream and try to understand why on the streets every week we are having this downstream problem of food insecurity. And as you start to dig, you all know there are laws, there are systems, there's policies that have created this need. So that's how we focus our quarterly gatherings. And I should say, our volunteers and the people who attend these programs are both food secure and food insecure. That's a priority for me because our focus is to center the stories of the people who live in this Northeast end. So we're going to tell you about a few of the things we've done as we sort of move through here. The first, I'm not sure this was the first, I think this might have been our second, but it was such an easy entry point. We did this program called One Town, 3 Films. And we watched, this was during the pandemic, so we were all sort of in our homes, and then we had to do this on Zoom. So it was really nice because we were all watching a lot of Netflix. So we just asked the community, all of our folks, we said, could you just watch 1 or 2 or 3 of these films? And then we're going to come together as very diverse people and chat about them. It sounds so easy, and it was transformative, I think, in so many ways. So the 3 films that we watched here were King Richard, which was the story of Serena and Venus Williams' dad, and really just their whole family. And I think this will be helpful again if we're trying to set this model. These are just some of the questions that my leadership team asked at the tables. And like I said, this particular one was right after the holidays during the pandemic, so we had to do this on Zoom. But could you go back to King? And I think that you all will have access to these if you wanted to just literally steal this from us and do it in your town. You know, you bring folks together and ask kind of hard-hitting questions that ultimately get to the idea of why there is separation in our very town, you know. Get people to start to think about, to go upstream and to say, well, what really created these issues? What created these stories? And so these are some of the questions that we use for this one. You can keep going. This one, the one night in Miami, the discussion questions here, to bring a group of multi-generational folks together and speak the truth about what our schools speak about Malcolm X and how they teach Malcolm X was fascinating. Between the youngest people there who are like, no, we didn't learn about Malcolm X, to some of our oldest community members who are very timid about teaching about Malcolm X in our schools. And then diving into the importance of that. And like, I mean, it's right in front of us. Why are we teaching what we teach? Why are we skipping what we're, you know, huge parts of history? And then how is that playing out in our town? So with my teaching background, it's like I form these questions and then we sit together as a leadership team and we have these practice panel discussions. You know, I'm not just like send them an email like, here, ask these questions at your table. We're bringing together 70, 80 people who are diverse. You have to prep this team, you know, and especially with issues like this and issues like, you can go to the next one. The third movie we watched was My Name is Polly Murray. Do any of you know Polly Murray? She was the first. Yeah, I'm glad. So she was the first Black female Episcopal priest, and she was ordained in Chapel Hill. She was a queer woman. This movie introduces themes of mental illness, discrimination against her in all the ways you can imagine. She was an advisor to Ruth Bader Ginsburg as well. She was a dear friend to her. So again, when you have this intergenerational group of Baptists and Episcopalians and all who are talking about this bigger than life figure who struggled with her queerness, you can imagine it's super messy. This work is messy. But, you know, again, this is how we sort of came together and asked some of these questions. I think So I'll stop talking. You can stop me too.
Well, I think at this point,
Yeah,
one of the things that was very important as we formed these groups and held these sessions, we had to create an environment where everyone felt safe. So we had certain rules at the beginning so that people would feel comfortable sharing. We had a mixture, as Joy said, of people. I mean, I'm from the Northeast, born and raised in Philadelphia, lived in New Jersey before moving down here to Wake Forest 6 years ago. My views may be very different than a native North Carolinian. And so we needed to create a space where everyone felt comfortable airing it, particularly since we were talking about racial issues. We were talking about racial issues in the South, which is just a little different, if you can imagine, than talking about racial differences in the North. And so one of the things that I think that helped to make the 3 films, 1 town so successful, one of the things was the fact that they could view these movies at their leisure. And that may not seem like a big deal, but one thing we have to take into consideration, not everyone is so comfortable with doing a lot of heavy reading. And that you can lose a lot of your community members. If you say, well, I want you to read this 15-page document, and a lot of people are going to get very tense, and some people's school was not their favorite subject. So by watching films, everyone was able to participate, and they did not have to watch all 3. You can watch 1, you can watch 2, you can watch 3, whatever made you feel comfortable. And these films each one was very different. So someone might have had a very negative reaction to one film, and then they watched another, and they had something more positive. So it was something for everyone in there. And I think that helped to make it a success and made the people in the group also feel comfortable for the work we were about to do in terms of dissecting. What did we see on screen? How did that reflect back on your life's experiences and the sharing of that?
Yeah, I want to add, this is about this program. This was the first quarterly discussion that I had attended. And I was not part of the discussion team or anything. I was a participant. And one of the things that I was so impressed at is the tone that was set immediately with the invitation and the description of the program. That the questions that we were going to talk about, intergenerational trauma, we were going to talk about masculinity, we were going to talk about queerness. Those issues were put forward right away, so people knew what they were coming. They had some sense of the conversations that we were going to have. But then the community leaders, right? Roxanne, you were a leader at this one. Joy, you of course were the facilitators. Now, someone who has done, we have a book club at the museum and we talk about issues of race, gender, sexuality. But I am the facilitator, and we bring in authors and experts on different topics. But here, the facilitators of the conversation were so well prepared to facilitate these conversations. They had done extra research about the films and about the historical topics that they explore. And they were prepared to have these conversations, and they were already trusted and respected in the community. So it wasn't some stranger coming in to facilitate this conversation. And that, I mean, I think that there are always pros and cons to having like facilitators you know and you don't know, but I thought for the purpose of this event, that was, and for all of our events, that's been such an important aspect to how we are defining success, that people are having open, honest, vulnerable conversations, and that they leave, and that's what satisfaction leaves like. They just know that they have a community, that they're doing this with people that they know, they love, they care about already, even if they find out in a conversation that they disagree, right? Like we're finding, especially in our conversation about Pauline Murray, right? That how this community just, there needs to be training and conversation about how we talk about someone like Pauline Murray and her queerness. And that was, for some people, they had those conversations before. They've been to the Pauline Murray Center. And for others, they this was the first time encountering her story, and our facilitators need to be prepared to navigate that, and I think they were.
And the other thing is, relationships oftentimes supersede all the research that you can do, right? I mean, look, if you're to take on something like this, you can see in a university setting, this would be a 3-year-long, 5-committee program. Mhm. We know it's messy, right? But it's like, look, I'm out on the street, I'm listening, I'm hearing, I'm seeing what's happening. My leaders are in huge congregations and tiny congregations. These are issues that our people are talking about, both food secure, food insecure. So we can worry about how our facilitators are trained all day and night. Or we can say, we're gonna have this common language of 3 films in one town. So that if you run into somebody in town, chances are they might be watching this film and you can talk about it, right? So there's that. And then it's like, we all have relationships with each other, in some way, my leaders have a relationship with those who are attending. And so if we make missteps, if we say something that others don't agree with, there is relationship. We didn't start this 7 years ago. This is, years into this when I'm continuously being in the community. Tenice is, born and raised in the community. Like, these are relationships that I think sometimes supersede all the training and all the difficult conversations. That's what we find in our work over and over again.
I think one thing that when we were discussing these 3 films that came up repeatedly was the difficulties people had in discussing these topics with their own family members. People would talk about how they could or they could not bring this up at a family gathering, or how they felt like they were the odd man out. And they felt that it was refreshing that they could come to our quarterly gathering and share these views that they could not share with the people in the house that they lived with. When you think about every day, you're living in this situation with people and you can't even open up about these and these are delicate topics, because it all came down to racial issues and how people are perceived. And I don't care what household you're in, not everybody's going to have the same perspective on this. But we did create that safe space. We did set the parameters, and you can do this. I think as Joy said, sometimes it gets messy, but we weren't aiming for perfection. We had to take that off the table, because if you aim for perfection, the first time you mess up, you're like, oh my God. And then, you just want to throw in the tap. And that's not what this was about. This was soldiering through. Even when somebody came out with a statement that you had to say to yourself, just keep a poker face, keep your hands under the table, and soldier on.
Speaking of telling the truth, so our next event was it wasn't our next event, but this is the next one we're going to highlight, was in this past June.
Yeah, so that I'm glad you said the thing about perfection, and Joy, I'm glad you brought up the university. That was one of the, yes, when I first, after that program I participated in as a guest, I was connected with Joy from someone from the town, and she was like, you guys need to meet, you need to talk. And Joy wanted to do a walking tour. And I say Joy, this is a conversation that came out of her steering committee. And she said, and I said, well, we're doing a lot of research on Wake Forest's original campus, which is now the home of the Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, a pretty conservative seminary and college. And we were doing research on Black experiences on the college campus. And a lot of that research had focused on the African Chapel, which was a part of Wake Forest Baptist Church that was founded by free and enslaved Blacks who lived and worked on the campus. And we were also researching the experiences of Black men and women who were working on the campus after emancipation and during the Jim Crow era, and their experiences on the campus and the community that they built across the railroad tracks in the Northeast community. And we were also talking about the built landscape the role of enslaved Black laborers in constructing the campus buildings that are still extant on the campus. And so I said, well, we have these topics and we have this space, we have place. So let's invite people to the campus and let's do a walking tour. So I reached out to, I want to emphasize how interdisciplinary this work is. We reached out to one of my colleagues at the university, Dr. Derek Hicks, who works in the Divinity School. And he is a historian of African American cultural experiences, religion, foodways. We reached out to Andrew Kennedy, who's currently writing a new history of the university that specifically looks at its relationship to the transatlantic slave trade and child slavery in North Carolina. And then we connected, I worked with the rest of our museum staff, our archaeologist and executive director to do a program on the plantation, talk about the evolution of Black labor on the campus. So the campus was founded on a plantation that had over 42 enslaved men, women, and children working there when the North Carolina State Baptist Association purchased the plantation from their enslaver, Calvin Jones. And that community was relocated to Tennessee in 1832. And then after the Baptist Association purchased the campus, founded Wake Forest, they are hiring and employing in enslaved laborers from other nearby plantations. So what we see is an enslaved community that is changing consistently, and that are being torn away from families in other counties, Granville, Wake County, Franklinville County, to work at the plantation, providing food and water to dormitories, again, building campus buildings. So there was much to talk about, and we had been in the midst of this research, and I'm telling Joy, I'm like, well, there's a lot of still unanswered questions. You know, there's a lot. I mean, I need to wrap my head around how we can do this and provide some context that we can then base a community conversation on. And Joy said, we're not aiming for perfection. And we want to show people that this is an active research process. We want to be vulnerable and talk about why we weren't asking these questions before, why we're asking them now, and how asking them together can make this whole process even richer and more fulfilling. And so, yeah, we set up a walking tour, and I don't know where. We had people explore. I mean, you could see everyone who came out. I mean, I was astounded. 70 people came out to this. In June, it is hot. The amount of people that had been at the museum before, well, there were probably like 10 people out of the 70 who had ever even been to the museum before. And let's just talk about a little community table. Yeah.
This is the space in our town, and I wish that we could take you there. This is the space in our town that is adjacent to the Northeast End, which is a historically Black part of the town. And then a lot of the people in the historically Black part of town have not been on that campus. And I'm gonna let you.
Yeah, so there was a lot of, there were several come to Jesus moments during that. I'm like, oh my God. There were a lot of those moments. I'm like, oh my goodness, like, you know, you hear about your big institutions like UNC do that were built on the backs of enslaved people. Me being a native and knowing that the history of Wake Forest College and Wake Forest University, it still did not dawn on me. I was completely naive. I'm like, oh, not my precious town of Wake Forest. You know, it didn't even dawn on me that this university, this college was built on the backs of the enslaved people. It took me a minute for me to kind of digest that and realize that, like I said, even knowing that most of our colleges and universities had that same story, it was just that punch to the gut when you realize that the town that you love and grew up in, that you cherish, has some of that same dark history as well. So it's the realization of that. One thing that really that my table really kind of hit on was Derek's presentation with the difference in the worship styles when it was the enslaved people worship service, when it was led by a white pastor versus a Black pastor. Every now and then, they would have programs or whatnot where it was a Black pastor. And just how the difference in those, the different messages that were relayed, when it was a white pastor speaking, you're to follow your slave. I mean, you're to follow your master. You're supposed to obey your master. But then when, they had services without the white pastor there, they felt more liberated. They felt more free. It was not the oppressive, you have to listen to your slave, you have to obey your slave master. They felt more free in their worship service. They also incorporated some of their old African rituals. They would get in a circle and dance in a circle, more, incorporating their African roots and rituals into a religion that was somewhat imposed upon them. But that was a huge topic. And also something that Sarah said, how some families were just displaced. They were moved to different plantations. These worship services was a time that they could get together with their families, where they could see their family members that were at other plantations, because they all came to this church service. So it was kind of like a reunion as well. So they were celebrating, of course, their religion, but they were also celebrating each other and the fact that they could come together and see those family members that they may not see on a regular basis. Some children and kids were separated. And so that was very, and it kind of resonates with me, because especially in the Black culture, religion and church is so monumental. It is foundational. And yes, we love God, we follow our religious path, but I feel like in the Black community, the reason why is because of things like that. That was a time for us to get together. But sometimes with the only time we could get together and see some of these family members that we don't get to see on a regular basis. So that was kind of, like I said, the hot topic at our table.
If you could, you're a native of Wake Forest. And it was mentioned that many of the people in the Northeast had not gone to the museum. Could you just speak on why you think that might be?
So that came out pretty much at the harvest dinner. But yeah,
What
so
about the campus though?
the
Because your
campus,
mom had said she had been there to graduate. They held the graduation there and she had not been there again.
so my mom had a very bad experience
Yeah,
over there, a traumatizing experience over there.
on campus, not at the
On
museum.
on the campus.
Yeah.
So, and I'll get a little bit more to that during the harvest dinner. No, but I mean, so no, a lot of us do not go to that campus. And I'll be very honest with you. I attended school, of course, in Wake Forest. And the history of him having slaves, never mentioned. And we took field trips. We took a field trip there. That was never mentioned. And so I have a lot to say about that, but I'm going to save that for later. But so we're having these difficult conversations, and we have people of all colors, ages, some with political statuses as well. Some of our elected officials are in these conversations. Not as many as we would like, but it is very important for them to acknowledge, if nothing else, the significance of enslaved people, not only to that campus, but to the building of Wake Forest as a town.
Now, one thing was interesting at my table when we were discussing the walking tour, one of the town officials was at my table, a very high-ranking town official. And as we discussed some of the feelings and aspects of what we learned from the walking tour on the campus and about how the enslaved people were used or deployed or what have you, when people would raise issues of concern, you know, about their treatment and what have you, this individual would sit there muttering, well, there's two sides to every story. So this kind of had a chilling effect on me. And so I just very gently said, well, I noticed that you seem to, you know, have some comments. Would you like to share with the group, you know, why you feel that you have to say that? And they just clammed up. They did not say anything. And then, you know, it just led me wondering, well, why did you come? I mean, evidently you knew what this was. You're coming almost with your own agenda. And it just had a disquieting impact on the discussion because everyone who knew who this individual was. And I guess, you know, they did not want to say things that might possibly come back to bite them. And so sometimes you have to be careful in terms of who is there and what they're doing. I would like to think that they did not intentionally come to be disruptive, but they did kind of disrupt that openness, and it kind of took away from the safety feeling of being able to just share your real feelings about what happened. So that's when we talk about how it gets messy and it's not perfect.
Yeah, that last question, isn't that a question that every church, every school, every town, every county should be asking, right? So have you ever wondered about the role? Like, that's just basic. And who has the space to do that? And that's what these table conversations are, and they're messy.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, you know, I think one of the issues that I had, you know, coming into this, we just built a highway bypass. And the bypass is named after Calvin Jones. The only thing I learned about Calvin Jones is that he was a physician in the cardiac, the first cataract surgery, I'm sorry, cardiac.
Nick Goldberg,
And then
highly
the-
debatable if that's even true.
Right.
Oh, great.
But he was a very prominent physician. And when, you know, having learned the real history, I'm like, this is who we chose to name out of all of the people, the great people that have done great things in our town. This is who we choose to name a major highway after.
Like recently,
Yes, and like,
Not
you
like-
know,
in 1950.
like this, yeah, this is not like 30 years ago. This has been within the past, 10 years?
Easily, yeah.
But the full history has never really been shared like that. And like I said, with me, how I cherish Wake Forest, it's like really eye-opening and heartbreaking. All at the same time when you have that realization.
And it's complicated work when those feelings come up. I'm gonna tell you to hear, and I'm the one who hears a lot of the feedback. I share it with the leadership team, but you know, there's times where I'm like, what have I done? This is a bad idea. This is hurtful. And then you keep rolling back to what is truthful. We can keep avoiding the truth, or we can try to put the truth out there and try to be talking about it really.
Well, I think I think the one thing when you're talking about like trauma in this situation and just like how, you know, all of these programs, we are also talking about Black joy. Like there is a conscious effort to do that as well, to talk about breathe life into Reverend George Harris, who moved the chapel and was the founder of Olive Branch Baptist Church, right? Like to look at resilience, look at community
The
building.
stories,
Yeah, but I do think though, that it's important that these questions and that these topics are coming out of the community and having discussion. This is not just the museum saying that, oh, well, the museum was founded, I mean, really to be a place for Wake Forest University alums to come and remember the good old days of being in college in 1950s and why did the school ever move. And so that's what the bulk of our collection has focused on and our exhibits. Here's the history of the law school, here's the history of the medical school. But I think it's important than rather just saying that, well, the Slavery, Race, and Memory Project was created, and now we're gonna talk about how enslaved men and women built our campus buildings. Okay, and so you all should come to the museum and see this exhibit, right? We're developing programs and questions that relate to the questions that are actually being asked at the meals program twice a week. You know, these are questions that people are coming to us, and we're not just studying, we're not just deciding that, oh, we're just gonna now spend the next 10 years talking about Black trauma, because that's what the Slavery, Race, and Memory Project, you know, is doing, which they're not doing, but I mean, that I think is, one of the ways that we've gone around.
Do you want to move to the third? And since Denise kind of set it up too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The harvest dinner. So Joy came to us to talk about the harvest dinner, and I'll let you pick up on that, but I'll just connect to some of the student research. We've been working with Wake Forest University students to transcribe the Jones family papers and to build a database so we can build biographies of the enslaved individuals who were on the campus in the 1820s. So this is before the university was founded. And I do have some examples of the biographies we're building here. But we're tracking, we're trying to build family genealogies with this work, also looking at the skills and the expertise of these individuals, identifying moments of resistance, and looking at the broader networks of these families. So we have been compiling a lot of research on the enslaved community and the relationship between the Jones and the enslaved community. And one of the things we wanted to do for this harvest dinner is, coming out of the walking tour, a lot of people still had questions about Calvin Jones and about the plantation, less so about the university history. And so we wanted to take those questions, you know, who was Calvin Jones? What was this plantation? Who were the people who lived and worked here? And how are we finding that out? Like, what is the research process? What archives are we using? And then have a question about, how do we commemorate? How do we memorialize? How do we talk about this history? And so that's what the Wake Forest Community Table came to the museum asking to do. And I said, well, we're happy to help you with the community dinner. Where's it going to be? Because our museum our exhibits have not changed, right? Our exhibits are still. And they said, well, let's have it at the museum, right? Like, let's do it at this place that is not welcoming. Right, you're gonna see some of this.
There's a bunch of old white people on the walls. That is our museum in town. And so Sarah was like, where's this gonna be? Like, should we have it at Olive Branch? And I'm like, why are we having it at Olive Branch? Like, no, this is what we need to center these stories in this space.
And so we invited our board. We got the university to fund it.
We sure did.
And this is, I love this photo here. This is us asking members of the community, you know, if you've been here before. And I think that is the hands right now, that if you've been here, or is that no, this is if you've never been. This is
Who's never been here before?
Oh, is that what that one is?
Yeah, and then the one on the left said, they raised their hand.
Okay, gotcha. But that's our provost from the university. They are talking with a community member. We got our new provost down for this event.
So what this dinner was, and it came from something that our town has done for, I wish I looked it up, it's been 60 years. And we do this thing called a community dinner at the holidays. And we honor like the volunteer of the year. There has been, in those 50 some years, I think one Black member of our community has been honored. And I was like, I get invited every year. I never go. I'm like, this isn't my thing. It's busy. And I was like, what community is this that's going to this, right? This isn't a community dinner. So I was like, I'm going to do my own community dinner, and we're going to do it in this space. And we're going to reclaim, just as we did on that campus, reclaim spaces for people in the community to attend. And so those two things were playing out in my mind. I'm like, but I don't have enough money to do like a big dinner at a museum. So all those fees were waived, and the university came forward. And I said, okay, so here's this community dinner. Our centerpieces are going to be the humans who worked on this land. We're going to have centerpieces with their pictures if we have them, but at least their biographies. So, you know, people at community dinners like to do centerpieces. Well, our centerpiece right in the middle, as it should have always been, the enslaved people should be in the center of our town. And so we just put them in the center of our table. And then we had these rocks around the pictures that the university students made. Like, no, I mean, this was a whole team of students who did this. And that's why the importance of this collaboration is, I mean, it becomes clear at this event. So we have these postcard, like, you know, they're a card. Yeah, you have them. And instead of like starting the dinner with grace, our community leaders were like, and we told everybody what we were doing. This was a harvest dinner centering the people who were enslaved in our community. So we weren't sure, it wasn't a gotcha moment at all, but people still came, like a lot of people came. They wanted to talk about this. So then instead of grace, we picked up the card and then we read about our person that we were centering that night. And just remembering them, talking about their lives, thinking about them, processing, and then we shared a meal together. Again, food insecure, food secure. All ages, all background, everybody's at this table. It's really crazy because, you know, a lot of people who come to my food program, they like to come and do like mission work, you know, like they like to come and do. But since they're part of the community table, then they also come to these things too. So it's this really, it's hard to get all these people together in different ways. So anyway, go ahead, we can, did I forget something there? So here's, yeah, this is.
We'll just all flip through the questions here, and then why don't we just talk about some of the table discussions?
I think, so does everybody have a view on how we got everybody to the table? That was the center, and we're in this white space, historically white space.
I mean, there's a great picture of our auditorium.
Look at Tenice there with all the portrait.
She's got the board members at her table.
Yeah.
Did you have the mayor? Yeah, you had the mayor.
This was the one. This was the event for me where I just was just like, you know what? There is no room for the sugarcoating. I went all in, nothing, held nothing back. And it is very, what kind of stuck out of my mind too is that I had another church relative that's my mother's age, and to see how reserved she was with talking about some of the things that we're going to talk about. It just gave me so much more joy because I'm just like, yes, we got to continue. My daughter, she's right beside me. She's listening to these conversations as well. We've got to get our youth involved so they can be in on these conversations, so they can be aware and they have the empowerment to make these changes. But just a little bit of insight. The museum that the Harvest Dinner was held at, it is located directly behind a railroad track. Okay. The significance of this railroad track is that that's what, it's the crossing of the tracks, okay? So, right. So one of the questions that was asked was, how often have you visited this campus? How often have you visited the museum? And I visited the campus that's where the actual Calvin Museum home is located now. I visited once as a child on a field trip. That's the only time. And then as an adult, I visited the museum one time, and it only took me one time for me to figure out I didn't want to go back because no one on the walls looked like me. Nothing. No Black females, no African Americans anywhere. Well, not anywhere. It's a couple of drops there, but yes, I'm sorry. This is me. I'm very direct. But there was not a lot of representation of not even those that were enslaved, but people that I know in the Northeast community that have made major impacts within our community. So I had no desire to go back and visit the museum. And so my church member, my mom's age, she said, well, we were never allowed over here. And some of the people from the university, they were like, well, what do you mean you were not allowed? Was it a law? Was it no? She said, we did not come over here. We were not allowed over here unless we were brought over here, meaning that they were working over there. And so everyone's just in this disbelief, like, what do you mean? If it wasn't a law, why didn't you go? No, it was understood that you just did not go over there unless you were brought over there. And so I commented, I'm like, yeah, no, I can come over here, but I have no desire to come over here because I remember the stories that my parents would tell about how they would try to, when they finally integrated the high school, they would cross the track to get to school, and the white landowners let out the dogs on them. They released their dogs on them because they did not want them crossing that track through their property to get to school. And so I had no desire because I felt like I wasn't welcome. And just how that unwritten rule of law is understood and passed down from generation to generation. And so we had elected officials there, and, you know, some more people, you know, but that's not the case these days. You know, we have programs, everyone is welcome. And I'm just like, this was only a generation ago for me. So for me to just snap out of it like that, that's unreasonable. That is no, I have no desire. Like, this is my mom that was impacted by that. That's directly related, you know, related to me. So I have no desire to go there, go to that side of town. And so the question was asked, well, how can we make people of all kinds feel wanted and feel that like they are welcomed and invited? And I was like, honestly, programs like this, where the town acknowledges the messed up things that they've done. They acknowledge the history, the dark, ugly history. Acknowledgement goes a long way. Acknowledgement is half the battle. Because if you don't acknowledge that there was or still is a problem, you cannot grow and learn from that. And I think
And you can't solve it.
yeah, because no one is talking about it because it's not acknowledged. It's
You
swept up under the
can't
rug.
solve what is not brought to the light of day.
Right. And so, but I said what I'm going to do going forward, and what I've already started implementing doing, whenever they have something like our 4th of July parade for the town, it's right on that road. We're either in it or we're volunteering. My daughter is going to know that this is a town that she belongs in, that she's welcome everywhere. We're doing the work. So to ensure that. And so I have made it a challenge to myself to be more present in those spaces where you don't see a lot of us in a town, because it has to start with someone. And so, and then we got some good ideas yesterday. The night at the museum during Black History Month. That's something we're going to take a look at to get more people, more of our African-American residents comfortable going in those places, and then asking those questions as to, well, why isn't Miss Geraldine Hall on this wall? Because she did this, that, and the third in the Northeast community. She made this impact that reached many people. Miss Evelyn Jones, one of our first Black mayor, not mayor, town commissioner. I cannot think of her name, but
Ailey Van.
yes. And so my thing is, we want more of that. We want to ask those questions. Where are these figures from our community in this museum for the town that we live in? And so that's kind of going forward some of, I know, my personal initiatives when it comes to us being in those spaces and feeling comfortable in those spaces.
Do you think we'll ever be able to do, I think we're all guilty of segregation. And that's what you're talking about. Do you think we'll ever achieve that in the church, the Black churches? Because that's a center where it's their safe space. And I don't know, I struggle with that question myself, because, you know, I think if we can get the churches integrated, you know, but then I don't think, and it's probably true both ways, but I know hearing the lectures here that is a safe place where Blacks can feel like they can be their true selves. And if that's the case, would we want to take that away from them,
Mm.
you know, in this process? You know, throw out the baby with the wash, so to speak. So you know, I thought that was an interesting.
I think that there is space in our society for both. I mean, part of human nature is that people feel comfortable with other people who have the same interests. I think the problem comes in when you tell one group of people that we don't care what your interests are, you're staying over here. I think that is the problem. I think everyone would like to have wherever they call their safe spaces. But as long as there are not barriers,
From
legal, physical, or otherwise, that stop you, I think that is where the issue comes in. That is not just in, you know, blacks feel safe in their black spaces. I'm sure whites feel safe,
in their
white spaces,
yeah,
you know, and
exactly.
Hispanics, and we can just, you know, do the whole rainbow coalition here.
I think I add to that.
Sure.
Okay, I do want to say that I want to add to this idea when you mentioned self-segregation. Like what Tenice just described is how Tenice is reacting to the conversation
Oh,
and
yeah.
that she's been a part of it. And I just want to be very clear, like from the museum standpoint, we really can only control the story, our walls and the stories that we tell. And so our job is to be an inclusive place where people feel welcome. And so like that is what we have control over. So it's not, and that's one thing that we've had to have conversations with our board about is, oh, well, we brought this exhibit about African-American quilting, right? And no one from the Northeast community came. And it's like, it is not on the onus, right, of Tenice to come and be in the 4th of July program. Like if you choose to do that, that is great. You do it, you know, like but it's not, we can create a space. It's still our job to every day ask what stories are we telling, whose voices are we elevating, who's at the table, who is our board? And will then our board, you know, is the question not, oh, the board brought in this exhibit, well, who is the board and what questions are you asking and why did you choose that exhibit, right? And so I think that it's constantly self-reflection. And so I say that like, it is when I'm doing visitor studies and trying to figure out who's coming to our program, who's not, it's never, you know, well, why aren't they coming? Right? You know, like you have to do some of that thought, but it's not like, you know, we don't want to, if there's a place that you're thriving, we want you to thrive in that place. We just want to also create a community and a culture where you will thrive as well, right? And so like, that's how we're thinking.
Area of responsibility.
Yeah, like we want all people to thrive and feel safe and have joy and that experience. And so that's whether or not there's a strong black church or white church in our community, right? You know?
And I think white churches, by the way, they need to ask those questions as well. Like, how do we have this land? We've heard that in these forums, you know, how do we have this land? That's it. That is a critical question that aligns with our baptismal covenant. And not enough white churches are doing that. Yeah.
So I think the churches are not necessarily where these conversations happen, only because I'm a Quaker. People would come to our service and not feel comfortable with it. I think the church is where you find the way that you want to worship. I think we need to create safe spaces to do these where you feel like you're being heard and you feel like there's a safe space where you can kind of leave your biases at the door and really come in to learn and listen. We have an organization here in town that's been here for 28 years doing this, similar to like we've got the University of William and Mary who has the same issues. And we just got a memorial art for it just recently. I mean, we're talking this process has been happening in towns that have had long histories of these colleges and the land that these colleges are on, who inhabited them. It's all about learning and creating space for keeping our minds open to discovery. Because I love what you're doing and always kind of keep the communication lines open, talking, no silos, because that's where we get screwed up too, is that we all tend to stay in our own lane and do our own thing. We talk together like you all are doing, working together is really how change happens. And like you all opened it up, say, it takes time, and nothing's perfect. You can have something and it isn't gonna necessarily just keep doing it, right?
Speaking about nothing's perfect, we didn't say the end of the,
Oh, yes.
talk about nothing's perfect.
No, nothing's perfect. So one of the things that the group decided is that they wanted a way to mark the space and mark their presence at the night of the harvest dinner. And so after talking about different ways of memorialization and commemoration and understanding that we were still on a pretty shoestring budget, and that we wanted to, at this moment, at that dinner, facilitate a conversation about how we commemorate, how we memorialize, because that is a complicated process as well, and to start that conversation in our community. And so, yeah, there's that great photo of you, Roxanne. There you go. So what we did is, so here's some of the biographies. This was up there as a poster. All of the biographies that we used for the dinner are online on our website. But we had people decorate the stones, write the stones. And so like this stone, Penny was featured at this table, and Penny was separated from her husband, old Frank, when the Joneses relocated Penny to Tennessee in 1832. So this someone drew a heart that's broken on this stone. This is one that I saw a lot of, is that in that conversation about commemoration, again, bringing back issues of generational trauma and just silences in the museums and absence and erasure. And so this, one of the steering committee members and the chefs of Community Table wrote and designed a stone featuring names from her family that are absent in the museum and in our stories that we tell our exhibits. And so then we asked folks that they could take those home, or they could place them around the grounds of the museum. And so they're there now. Yeah, here's Ella, Amy, Matilda, that family there. And so we placed them around the museum, and there's these yard signs in there. What the group decided to do is, after learning about the Stumbling Stone project in Europe, they decided that they wanted to explain a little bit about how they thought to do this, and then why the stones are there, and you can get a QR code to the biographies and learn more about it. And again, this is like a temporary, like imperfect solution to this. For the most part, people were really like enthusiastic, or it was felt meaningful to do this. Where there was one community member who this idea turned her off, that's what we wanted to have, that conversation, right? Like, we're open to that conversation. We just had a historian at the museum who is an expert in Jewish American history. And he's also like, well, this is really complicated to use this model. And so, like, to unpack that, and it's like, yeah, like, you know, it is, right? It is really complicated. It is messy. And we had those conversations about how the Stumbling Stone project is complicated, and there is a lot of conversations about appropriation, or just like insensitivity, or just like virtue signaling with this type of memorial. There's also conversations about, like, these are stones.
Why are they on the ground?
Why are they on the ground?
And they don't understand the significance of your bowing. You have to look down and acknowledge, to see the stones. And I'm sorry, like that's a form of respect. To have them kind of bow to look down, you know, I guess it's all about perspective and interpretation too. But, you know, people do, you know, people's filter, you know, like I said, it's not perfect. Nothing's going to be perfect, because we can't please everyone. But the genuineness behind it is what we wanted people to see. What do we want them to see? Yeah. And the impact. Yeah. And I think for the most part, we did that. Like,
Yeah, it's one. We started a conversation, you
It's the
know?
process, it's the process
Yeah.
that's important to the product. It's the process to get you to that point.
And the hope that they will then take it from the gathering and share it with their friends. I mean, I'd like to wrap up with what I think is like a success story There was a woman from our church, you know, she's Caucasian, she's very introverted. You know, she's one of those people who, I mean, she would come to the different gatherings, but you'll see, you know, she initially would not say anything. She was very timid. And she's also in a volunteer group with me called the Wednesday Women, where we just talk about anything under the sun after we do our backpack buddies. We pack food for food insufficient students over the weekend. And she came up to me a little while ago, and she told me she's assistant librarian at the Wake Forest Public Library, no, at the Nightingale Library. And she came up to me and she told me that the library has an exhibit on Black History Month. And I wasn't surprised. I mean, you know, and she said, but I want you to know that it started out on a table in the back in the corner. And I'm like, no, I'm not surprised. And she said, this very timid woman said, I saw it and I knew that that was wrong from coming to the different gatherings. So I started moving it forward. And she said she got a lot of flack from her coworkers. And they went and told the supervisor. And the supervisor said, why are you up here making waves? You know, it was out there in the corner. Each librarian had their own table. And evidently the librarian who did it, her table was in the back. And the woman said, well, that I understand that, but if this is your showcase, why would you put it in the back? And her supervisor told her, you will remove this. So she started somewhat slowly moving the books. And she said in that process, several people came up. And they said they noticed the books and they wanted to check them out. And she told them, well, my supervisor told me I have to put the books back in the corner. And they went and they complained to the supervisor. And so now that display that was in the front of the library, and you don't know this woman, but for this woman to take that stand, I just felt like if we touch nobody else, yeah, there's one less person out there who's going to be doing something crazy. You know? So, you know, there is hope. It's a step-by-step process as we find with everything else. And, you know, I guess all we can do is hope that at the end there will be light at the rainbow. But let's not forget the rainbow we already have while we're doing this work.
So the museum have, does the museum have to photographs of the African American people that contributed on the walls?
On the wall.
Pictures, and on the wall,
Oh, the portrait.
portraits, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, the portraits. Are they on the wall? Are the African American people in the community who have contributed, such as the Black woman who's commissioner for?
Oh, Ailey, yes. And so, yes, yeah. So, Ms. Evelyn Jones, Ms. Barbara Geraldine Taylor, we got a North Carolina Humanities Council grant in 2009 or 2010. So they were part of, like they were the interviews that we funded to do. So we had those interviews at the museum on like a kiosk there on our YouTube page as well. And then Ailey Young, the first Black woman commissioner, only the second woman commissioner of Wake Forest. Yeah, she's also in the exhibit. And so those are figures that, you know, were at the museum and featured in the museum when I came there, but there was no story or analysis like the Civil War, chattel slavery, like that was not mentioned in any of our exhibits when I came to the museum. And our orientation film, there are Black leaders in our community that were featured in their interviews, talked about that, and segregation was talked about a little bit, but always kind of with lots of innuendos or very implicitly. And so so yeah, like that's how the museum had approached interpreting Black history.
Okay, and the other question is Black history outside of everywhere for your community?
Yes.
Black history is every month, so all your events go out here.
Yeah, they are all through it. We do have the Calvin Jones house that's still on there. We don't have any of the buildings, but we're trying to identify where the enslaved cabins are. And so, you know, like the stories of Lydia, who we think Lydia lived in the Calvin Jones house. You know, we're working on, creating an interpretive plan for the spaces that she occupied in that house, which would have been all of them, not just the upstairs rooms. And so, yeah, there's ongoing efforts at the museum. It's a constantly pushing to incorporate more.
One more, we had tracks in our hometown that divided. We also had the high schools, there was North High School and South High School. I attended South. My nephew, which is on South High. Okay, my children, they broke the mode, and I thought, oh, you need to go to South, and I was like, oh, you don't need to go to North High. But then they did, and they changed my whole mindset. That generation who say you need to pull it, that's going to change the mindset. It was amazing, that transformation, because I was like, you know, I was like, just getting mad about it. It's okay to, you know, it's matter. At first I was mad. Now I'm not mad. I just want to be educated.
Yes, and you're looking for solutions. Yeah, I think, and I think like that's kind of like once you, like, you have to get it out first. You have to get past the emotional, like you have to work through it. I'm not gonna say get past, you have to work through it. Put in the work to get to where you want it to, the change that you want to see.
Yeah.
So we have to work through those emotions, because like I said, it took me just realizing, oh my goodness, and just here recently, just several things, how much racism is just embedded in everything. And supremacy is based in everything, our everyday lives when it, you know, in America. But just like, oh my goodness, just like every kind of entity, just about how it's had its dark past. And, you know, it angers us because, you know, a lot of times we're not the ones reaping the benefits of these entities, and, you know, so, but just working, okay, be mad, but be mad while doing the work. Like, let that motivate you to the change that you want to see.
And I started with myself because it was necessary for, you know, we want to embrace all of the children. And know, and the DNA, what can I say? Okay, it's all over the place, right? But I'd like to say now that our community back home, wow, has changed. The South High School and North High School are now one high school, Springfield High School. And the old South High School now has John Legend Theater. He is from my hometown.
Oh, wow.
And he has been very instrumental in bringing this together. They have the cultural festival every year, and that has been an immense change in the cultural festival where all cultures come together. You know, she was one yeah. So all cultures come together and showcase and let everyone, because if you don't have a relationship that's one-on-one and learning culture,
You're not gonna get into
it. Traditions and all that. You know, sometimes you're afraid of what you don't know. So that has done a lot.
Our next program is with high schoolers.
That's what I was gonna say. I was
Yeah.
like, we're,
And if you want to follow us as We Force Community Table, we'll show you, it is a heck of a program coming up. So we are doing it with the youth, because, you know, sometimes they might not feel like coming out at night to eat with a bunch of people, you know, but we're doing it. We're just going step by step with this
we're walking
amazing
the whole
team.
time.
Yeah,
It's just gonna be good.
yeah. So keep your eye on us.
Did we have one last question here?
Well, I just wanted to compliment you. I really like the way you had a dialogue kind of discussion in your discussion. I just had a couple questions. The museum, is that on the original campus? Is it in town? And also the Black church, the early church that was found. Are these on the original campus that you said now is a more conservative group? And how is that balanced? How are those protected? Because with the new configuration.
Yeah, so the museum is technically on land that was part of that original plantation, the 615 acres, but the
I'm
college.
thinking about
The
the
Wake Forest,
original
the Wake Forest, yeah. And so it was originally part of college land. It was sold off from the college in 1840. So we were moved there in 1956, the museum was. And so now we're in the Wake Forest Historic District, created when there would of course be only one historic neighborhood in the town, which was the home of the white faculty members. And so that's where the museum and the Calvin Jones House
And
is
it's
now
not
located.
affiliated with the current university.
The museum?
Yeah.
We're all staffed by so it's a
By
partnership.
Wake Forest University, not
Yeah.
by the seminary.
No,
Oh, no,
that's what I'm-
Yeah.
No formal relationship with the seminary, although one of the ways that we got to do this tour on the town is that our director has created a good relationship with the seminary.
Gotcha.
They do mow our lawn, I will say that. I mean, groundskeeping is expensive, so they do that, but.
I know, it's
Yeah.
like, are they gonna let us do this? It was like, yeah, we'll do it.
If I've got anything, all it is, I've got university resources and.
That's what I'm.
But to your other question, the African chapel or the African church, we don't think that building is survived or is extant anymore. I say we don't think, because there's some possibility that it's on another, on someone's personal lot, because there is like an oral history of it having been moved. So we're trying to figure out that the church that was built during the Reconstruction burned down. Yeah, that's Tenise's church.
It is Denise's church.
Yeah, and it was. Huh?
The church I attend.
Yeah.
Your church.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. But that church is still there, not the original building. The building was built in the 50s, right? Yeah. But the African chapel, the structure that was built, we think by enslaved members of Wake Forest Baptist Church, that we don't know where it is, if it's still standing, but so many of those buildings were moved around in the Reconstruction era that it could have been torn down.
We need to.
Yeah.
Sorry.